Welcome back to the NutriMedical Report, and joining us first hour on Wednesdays, we have Harley Schlanger. Harley's often substituted by some of the other amazing researchers and activists within the LaRouche Foundations. And Harley, we have a lot of hot issues that are burning right now. The United Nations report coming out Monday, supported by the United States and France, that, quote, absolutely that the Syrian government did chemical weapons against their own people, which is a total abject lie, proven by the Russian scientific research going back several months ago. The on-again, off-again report by the United Nations saying that they agreed that, in fact, the Syrian al-Nusra and other terrorists were actually having possession of chemical weapons, although they tried to say it was only there. We have Obama pushing forward a war which is basically not sanctioned by Congress, including the passage not only of intelligence information, satellite phones, but also training in Jordan of these terrorists, which are our abject enemies, many of them graduates of prisons that we had after they were captured in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have Obama doing some more things lately that have got himself in some hot water, and I want you to kind of burst this bubble around Obama, Mr. Teflon president, that seems to have an unspeakable amount of protection. The media, of course, are starting to waver in terms of their support, but what's the latest on Obama? What's the latest on this abjectly insane idea to start a war where Russia is blocked again and again, and China, in the Security Council, the idea of using force against Bashar al-Assad when he says he's going to turn over his chemical weapons to international control? What's up?
Well, it's unmistakable that Obama has suffered a string of defeats, one after another. And, the cynics out there are saying, well, so what? He's still in office. The Congress hasn't shown the guts to throw him out yet. And those cynics are, if you rely on those cynics, you're never going to get anything done.
Well, I think that they also, Mr. Bonner is had his feet put to the fire, and there's an internal revolution going on in the Republican Party. They're basically on the unfunding of Obamacare. That if Bonner and the so-called executives don't start doing the right things, there's going to be a revolution inside the Republican Party, and part of it will be Obamacare, part of it will be the impeachment of Obama because of many actions, not just this latest one, that he's done.
Well, it's also in the Democratic Party. Look, the party structures don't.
Oh yeah, they're flying apart. I mean, so many Democrats do not.
This was the whole point of the Syria vote.
Yeah, in fact, the Syria vote was stronger on the Democratic side than it was the Republican side against the idea of arming these terrorists.
But here's the important thing. What happened is that up until the last couple of months, there was this mythology that if you were a Democrat, you couldn't attack Obama because he's so loved and he's so powerful and he's so good on the media. If you were an African American, you couldn't attack him because you got to protect him from racism. If you're white, if you attack him, you're a racist. If you're a Republican, either it's not worth attacking him because you can't win, or that let's leave him in there to screw things up so badly the Republicans take back the Senate in 2014. Now, all of that is nonsense. The guy, it doesn't matter what color he is, he's the worst president we've had since Bush. And Bush is the worst president we've had since the previous Bush. We're just going downhill in terms of these presidents, and there's a reason for it, which I can get to in a moment.
It's also to destroy the office of the presidency. It's now basically a proxy for globalist government and international bankers that are destroying America's military power, financial power, and the sovereignty at home, and then spying on us like crazy. So they've expanded these things.
Now, just as an example, a very good friend of mine is the actor Ed Asner, who some people think is some kind of wild liberal leftist. But Ed made an interesting point in the Hollywood Reporter the other day. He was asked, why are more people in Hollywood not coming out against Obama and the war? And he said, because they're afraid they'll be called anti-black. And he basically sent out a message to them. It has nothing to do with race. The guy is a menace to the country. Now, the key thing, Dr. Deagle, and I'm saying this to all your listeners so they get this point, the key thing is that the American people showed some guts in the last couple of weeks. By 100 to 1, the calls going into Congress were against Obama's war. And Obama was forced to back away from this. And if you look at how this happened, it was a coalition that I think is unusual. You had the military sending out to everyone who would pay attention, don't do it. don't go into Syria. General Dempsey, during the hearings, when he was asked, well, what's the purpose of this mission? And he said, I don't know. Now, what could be more clear that the military's not with it?
Oh, my gosh. That's desperate, isn't it?
Well, then Dempsey, because he, as an active Joint Chiefs chairman, can't, if he doesn't want to resign, if he wants to stay in office, he can't do anything but go along with the president, at least in terms of what he's ordered to do. He said, we prepared a capability to do what the president wants. And then when he's asked, well, what is that? He said, I don't know. Now, meanwhile, he sent out people like General Zinni, General McCaffrey, retired military people were all over the media, from the left and the right, MSNBC and Fox, saying that this attack on Syria would be foolish, it would be nonsensical, it would accomplish nothing. Then you had the Russians, who were clear from the beginning. But then what started happening is you had a coalition of Democrats and Republicans moving against the administration. Now, to show you how intense this change is, there was an effort by Obama to put Larry Summers in as chairman of the Federal Reserve.
No, not just Obama, an effort, a Herculean effort. I mean,
Obama was totally committed to it.
Yeah, totally.
He didn't care what anybody thought.
Right.
Now, what happened is a group of Democrats said that they're going to bottle it up in committee and not let him get the position.
Wow.
And Larry Summers had his friends come out and say, well, Obama has zero political capital, so why should Larry go out and let his you-know-what flap in the breeze?
Right.
So they withdrew him. Now, this is a sign of the times. The Democrats are not in lockstep with Obama. The AFL-CIO spent 8 hours debating whether to denounce Obamacare or not. Now, the AFL-CIO...
They know the AFL-CIO is going to get totally hammered by Obamacare. I mean, this is going to hurt them bad.
Yeah, but remember, the AFL-CIO was the only real organization, besides ACORN, that put boots on the ground for Obama's reelection.
Right.
And at their convention in Los Angeles, 3 out of 4 of the delegates were bad-mouthing Obama. We were there. We were organizing them. They finally concluded that the idea behind Obamacare is good. In other words, if it were really that they wanted to give everyone health insurance, that's good. But then they said there are a few things that have to be fixed, and they had a list of 8 things that to fix would mean you'd have to repeal Obamacare.
Yeah, you got to actually start over again and do something rational, like allowing anybody to buy into Medicare, controlling costs, stopping frivolous lawsuits, allowing alternative health care and innovation, stopping the fee codes, setting up systems where you can actually have teams of people that can take care of people and pay salaries, rather than this idea of fee-for-service, which needs to be monitored and have total real privacy, not having HHS have death panels because they have access to the database of your health. This is sickening. It consumes lots of paperwork. The average doctor spends 7 minutes with a patient and 20 to 30 minutes with the paperwork every patient. That's ridiculous.
Well, and we're also seeing turn in the polls where the American people are now saying they don't want it. So there's a lot happening that's changing the situation. And on top of that, you had Putin outflank the president. You know, the president and Kerry are trying to say, well, our threat of force is what caused the change to occur. That's nonsense. What they saw is that the United States was about to bungle into something, and Obama was about to create even greater war crimes. Now, we can get to that in a second, but one final point. The president of Brazil canceled her scheduled meeting with Obama because of the NSA scandal.
Yeah, I saw that report in the Judge and in the other news items. That's pretty significant. It's one of the largest growing economies on the planet, and they said, no, we're not even talking.
And
we're not on
Susan
talking
Rice was
relationships.
supposed to convince them. We can come back to this after break, but this is an important part of the story.
Yeah, it's the fastest growing economy on the planet right now, Brazil, and they won't talk to America? No wonder. Amazing. Welcome back. and Harley, we have the Saudi question to touch on next. Let's get into that, because this is really important to people understand what really is going on here is so over the top, and you wonder, why are they so desperate to cover this up? Apparently, you mentioned that Congressman Walter Jones had a look at it and just said it had nothing to do with national security. So why the statement that we don't want to lose the Saudis? I mean, how would they, quote, lose the Saudis if this material, the 28 pages of about 9/11, gets out? What is it?
Just give me a couple minutes to develop this, because this really gets to the heart of the question of what we're dealing with. There is, many people know there's a secret government or a shadow government that runs things, and has been for, especially in place since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now, in the recent years, this is the Bush family is a part of this. This is the people who put Obama in power. But what is really behind it? On the one side, you have Tony Blair and the British, and you and I have talked about this a lot. But let me focus for a moment on the British junior partners and money bags for this, namely the Saudi royal family, and in particular Prince Bandar, who's the head of Saudi intelligence. Now, they were very much at the center of the operations behind 9/11, the original 9/11. That goes back to the 1980s, when the Saudis, including bin Laden, who, by the way, was Saudi and was from one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia that was tied to the royal family, they were funding, in conjunction with George Herbert Walker Bush, the vice president at the time, they were funding the recruitment of a jihadi army to go fight the Soviets in Afghanistan.
Right.
When the Soviets left, that grouping stayed together and essentially became a mix between Taliban running Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and elsewhere, targeting the United States. Now, this is the same grouping that was identified as the so-called hijackers of 9/11. It was all under Bandar's direction. This is the same grouping that was allowed to fly out of the United States on 9/11, when the U.S. shut down all air traffic except the traffic to take the Saudi families out of the United States.
It wasn't just the Saudi families. I think, if I remember correctly, the number of jets in the air was in the dozens. It wasn't just one or two jets.
No, it's hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Now, then what happened?
There were a lot of, if you want to call it, affiliates of this kind of network that were now is deeply embedded in the White House, and now the Congress, because they're buying off these congressmen and senators.
Let me finish this point, because I want people to get a consecutive picture of this.
Right, let's do that.
Discuss it. That this grouping was identified by the FBI in Sarasota, Florida. It was identified in the 9/11 Commission report, but the 28 pages that dealt with the Saudis was classified. And when Obama was running for office, he promised the families of 9/11 victims that he would see about declassifying this. Now, he subsequently refused to do it. Now, what this will show is what you just said, the degree to which the Saudis have their hands in the intelligence community. They're an intersection between Israeli Mossad, British, and Saudi operations inside the United States, but also running the terrorists who we are fighting in Afghanistan, who are trying to blow us up in Iraq, and who are now in Syria trying to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad.
Look at Bandar Bush, we call him now. He's now the Prince Bandar that runs the state of Saudi Arabia, makes a threat to Mr. Black Belt in the martial arts of Russia, Mr. Putin, that he's going to disrupt the Sochi Olympics, Winter Games in Sochi in 2014 because they control the Chechen rebels. And Putin says if we go to war, we're going to. So this is an example of the boldness of Mr. Bandar in terms of his threatening Russia. He's been behind this scene along with these other CIA and Israeli intelligence right since 9/11. It was a collaborative effort.
They are the bankrollers of international terrorism.
Right.
Now, what this international terrorist operation is doing at present is it moved from Libya, where the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group was an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. They moved many of the weapons from Gaddafi's Libya into Syria. They have sarin gas. They have access to all sorts of weapons and things of that sort. But the Saudis are the ones who continue to demand that the United States fund them and that the United States topple Assad. Now, we can go in later into why the Saudis are doing this, but the Saudis are at the center and somewhat of a rivalry with Qatar as to who's going to be the beneficiary of overthrowing Assad. But the Saudis are leading the charge. Now, the President Barack Obama nearly committed us to a direct military fight in Syria on behalf of those Saudi interests. When it was stopped by the American people, the U.S. military, and ultimately the Congress, Obama, just this last week, just 2 days ago, announced that he's signing an exemption of the prohibition against providing arms to the terrorists, so that we can provide arms to the rebels in Syria. And the reason he had to sign this exemption is that if someone's delivering weapons and they happen to end up in the hands of the jihadists, they can say, well, they were protected by the president, because we can't really tell.
So it's a preemptive thing like Fast and Furious, where they provided arms to so-called the Mexican cartels, only now it's applying it to our potential enemies and the enemies of Israel, Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, that have sworn blood death oaths against us and against NATO and European cities with manpads to bring down aircraft. And so Obama's preemptively trying to pass a rule so he'll cover his butt. Oh, my God.
Well, in the signing of the exemption basically says that the administration can do this, provided they go to Congress within 15 days before they provide the weapons. They're already giving the weapons. So he's violating the order he just signed.
It's retroactive. They've actually done this. What I have from my reports and intelligence is they're training chemical weapons use and operations in Jordan. They have special forces training these different units that they have, both Al-Nusra and other Al-Qaeda groups in Jordan, that they're supplying arms paid for by $50 billion by Saudi Arabia and Qatar money and Arab Emirates to buy all these advanced weapons. And now, of course, Obama is trying to expand this so they get heavier artillery, air cover, and much more advanced weapons, which is really going to force Russia and China to start putting heavy weapons in there. This is going to get very ugly.
Let me finish the point on the Saudis, because we have a break coming up. The key thing about the Saudis is that they are all over Washington trying to twist arms and make sure they get this thing through. Now, we had a meeting with an aide to someone in the Democratic leadership, an aide to Congressman Chris Van Hollen, who's one of Pelosi's lieutenants. And his aide said, we're never going to release the 28 pages because we need the Saudis.
Oh, my gosh. So what is hidden in those 28 pages that's so damning? I can guess when we come back. Amazing. Harley Schlanger, LaRouche Foundation, LaRouchePAC.com. We're back, and I want to continue with this, developing this whole issue. You mentioned that the General Counsel for Obama has quit or stopped. We have this unfolding situation where for months Obama has been doing something which is basically a declaration of war without congressional support. And he did this before in Libya. Yeah. He now has lost political capital dealing with Obamacare. I think Obama is now geopolitically a liability to the Democratic Party. I think that he is now so far out of touch where he's signing this agreement to try to preemptively protect himself from future issues of supplying arms to our potential enemies, that Obama basically needs to be impeached before he starts World War III. And he wants to preempt the Geneva II discussions, where they literally are going to remove the chemical weapons from Syria, stop the excuse for Israel to do a preemptive attack, because it isn't just over Syria. It's over multiple issues.
It's not just Syria, but let me go back just to finish what we were discussing right before the break on the Saudi question. You know, there are two forces that are ironically linked together in the Congress in support of war, in support of the Muslim Brotherhood, in support of Al-Qaeda. And that's the AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and Bandar's Saudi operation. And the Israelis, maybe you say, well, they're worried about Iranian nuclear weapons, which don't exist. The Iranians are not developing nuclear weapons. They're worried about Syrian chemical weapons. Well, okay, so maybe there's an agreement now to stop it. But the Saudis are committed to an all-out, long-term war. And the British, who are allied with the Saudis, intend that the United States be in the center of that war. Now, people who are defending the Saudis, and this is directly from Lyndon LaRouche, anyone who defends this Saudi connection is a traitor. So today, we have our members, our younger members, are in Washington, D.C., outside the Congressional Office Building, with big signs with a picture of a man named Ken Cummings, who's a senior aide to Chris Van Hollen, who's one of the Democratic Party leadership people. We don't know whether Van Hollen supports what Cummings told us, but Cummings told us in a meeting that under no circumstances would there ever be a decision made to release those 28 pages. Why? Because he said repeatedly, we need the Saudis. We need the Saudis. And we said, who do you mean we? And he said, we. You don't know what's going on here. And at that point, we said, well, had Kennedy not been killed? And he said, you don't know how bad Kennedy was. This is a Democrat. So we're going out with this guy's name on a banner saying, you want to know who wants war? Here's one of the people who wants war. And we're going to force Van Hollen to come out and either fire the guy or acknowledge that he's part of the Saudi treason faction.
Right.
Now, by doing that, we're going to put on notice everyone who is supporting the war, including people like Pelosi and Boehner and Eric Cantor, that these are not Democrats or Republicans. They should be registered as agents of a foreign power that's out to destroy the United States. And that goes for Obama as well. Now, with Obama collapsing and members of the Congress trying to figure out which way they're going to go, we have an absolutely unique moment to change the whole political geometry in Washington. And what's the key element to that change? It's Glass-Steagall. Because if you get Glass-Steagall through, you're going to bankrupt the largest financial institutions in the United States and in Europe. Put them through a bankruptcy process where they're going to have to eat their losses on the investment banking side. And many of them are going to end up in prison because we're going to do a thorough investigation. And, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but in Switzerland, of all places, supposedly the land of the bank secrecy and everything else, the Swiss National Parliament voted up a bill to impose Glass-Steagall in Switzerland. And the government, which has power over the parliament, said, no, we're not going to let that happen. So now there's an initiative, a referendum process of the people in Switzerland to force Credit Suisse and Union Bank of Switzerland to have to divest themselves of their investment banking portfolio, which means they would be cut down to size. But even in Switzerland, the center of secretive banking, you have a rebellion now against this bankster elite. And so this is the change that's occurring, Bill, and it really does represent a victory for the American people, but this is where you've got to go on the march. You know where they say the best defense is a good offense. You can overpower an enemy if you keep moving. We can't pull back our troops now. We've got to keep the calls going, keep the mobilization going, and this is where Glass-Steagall and Hamiltonian credit and the thermonuclear NAWAPA plan represent the direction the country has to go.
Well, we see that with the flooding in Colorado, too. It's a good example. There's no need for that kind of flooding. And so it's proper water management.
Absolutely.
Proper water management. We'd also be recharging the Ocala aquifer if we use what's called Webb-type hydrofracking without chemicals, which destroys the water table. We can get access to the oil shale, but we don't need to use chemicals, and we can use a much better system that's more efficient and much more, it would get us energy independent very quickly.
Well, on the Colorado flooding, the Army Corps of Engineers had on the books some simple plans that would have dealt with some of the problems on the Platte River and some of these other river rivers that were not prepared for what they call once-in-a-century flooding. Now
Right.
that it's happening, people are saying, gee, why didn't we fix this before? and in Colorado, they're saying this is Colorado's Katrina. Now, we have in virtually every part of the country some kind of infrastructure crisis that just hasn't hit yet, that will hit at some point in the near future if we don't change the overall policy. And you're absolutely right. NWAPA would have addressed this thing in Colorado exactly. The drought in the Southwest wouldn't have existed if we would have gone ahead with NWAPA. So we've got so many solutions, but the problem we have is that there's a banking cabal that's running the country, and Obama is their puppet, and until recently, the Congress has been engaged in silly little ideological partisan battles that divert people's attention from the real solutions. And they're trying to run it again with this debt ceiling, government shutdown nonsense that Boehner and the Republicans are trying to use, and Obama's using it also. You know, you have the two phony armies trying to distract attention from the fact that they're losing their troops.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
Well, it's one of these ironies that, you know, I think to step back for a second, we have to recognize what's really going on here. This is what LaRouche has been emphasizing for the longest time. The empire can't continue to exist, so it has to cannibalize itself, and that's what it's been doing. And now that cannibalization includes some of the people in the United States, we're seeing Americans start to say, well, wait a second, is this what they mean when they say austerity? You know, the idea austerity is okay for Africa, it's okay for Greece, but not for the United States. Well, Obama and the Republicans and then the Obama Democrats are in total agreement to gut Social Security, gut Medicare, gut the healthcare system, wipe out the medical profession. That's what they're doing. And this doesn't provide. Well,
it's already happening. It's not a future thing. It's already happening. It's been happening for several years.
Exactly.
Yeah, what's happening is you're going to lose your trauma surgeons. You know, even if you don't agree, like I don't agree with the polypharmacy ridiculousness of open drug cards. But we're going to lose trauma surgeons. We're going to use intensive care units. We're going to lose all kinds of things that are the good parts of healthcare.
As you said, we already have been losing it.
We're already losing it. We also, by the way, have these new cost control measures, which don't control the cost of drugs, medical equipment, and supplies. They can have a 12-inch long piece of rubber tubing used for specific
You know, the only
procedures.
cost they control, what the insurance company will pay you for.
Right, and not only that, you see your insurance is getting higher and higher, and it covers less and less.
Exactly.
So we have the situation where you buy poor quality insurance with less coverage, and then when they reach their limits, they kill the patient. Or provide terrible care and say, this is all you're getting. And they set up special programs with Health and Human Services to implement this.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant.
I want to change the topic just a little bit. One of the other articles you have here, New York Times op-ed, is overpopulation not the problem, and what we have is everything that a global government touches, everything that the U.S. government, which is basically now a proxy of global government, it's been steps since the death of John F. Kennedy. The presidencies have gotten worse and worse each time, have been more and more in obedience to global banksters, and of course, all of the wars of the last 2 centuries, right from the Napoleonic Wars, have been banker wars. We have a situation now where this is a banker war. They want to stop the pipeline from Iran through northern Iraq, through Syria to the Mediterranean. They want to get rid of the non-Rothschild controlling banks in Syria and Iran, which are 2 out of the 3. The other is Cuba. They want to make sure that they force Russia and China to a specific deal in terms of control of their economies through a globalist banking system that Russia is resisting and China is absolutely determined not to have. We have all these things going on when the globalist banksters don't have any more chips to put in the pile and double down. And I think they're double down. This is, to me, their move toward war is a desperate move by a dying banker elite that basically knows the cards are done.
That's absolutely the point. You see, there's another aspect that you brought up, this question of the flooding in Colorado and so on, this New York Times article. one of the interesting reports from the last couple of weeks, or two reports. One, the Arctic ice is growing and thickening.
Oh, yeah, I hear all these people still saying comments that it's melting. Yeah, there's some surges of methane hydrates, but the Arctic ice is growing like crazy. It's also growing in the Antarctic even faster. And this idea that we're heading into a warming period is foolishness. We are actually heading into a moderate-type ice age.
Well,
period.
and the NASA weather blog the last couple of days has been reporting that it's the lowest level of sunspot activity that they've seen in years, and they had projected that it would be much greater. Now, there are all sorts of other kinds of cosmic occurrences that are quite dangerous to us, including the fact that we're getting close to the point where the poles are going to be flipped, the Earth's magnetic poles. But the argument of global warming is being refuted by Mother Nature. Now, of course, the frauds who are behind this, they're not worried about warming or cooling. They're now saying, well, it's climate change. They're saying man is causing an ice age instead of a global warming.
Oh, yeah. Actually, we cause weather, I guess. If we create weather, we're responsible for it. We should die.
Yeah, and what this really shows, and that's why this New York Times article is so interesting, is that they're being forced to acknowledge that the real issue here has nothing to do with resources. It has nothing to do with warming or cooling of the planet. It has to do with people trying to wipe out the human population, or at least significant portions of it. And those are the people who run Obama. Those are the people who are behind the so-called Syrian war, which has nothing to do with Syria. You know, if you really look at this, they say Assad is violent because look what he's done in the Civil War. Well, maybe you could make a case that Abraham Lincoln was a war criminal also, because his armies killed a whole lot of Southerners. You know, the fact is, when a civil war is unleashed, it can get pretty ugly. And I think this argument that all these people have died, well, then why do we keep pouring arms in? Why don't we listen to the Russians and others? You know, Assad has said he'll dismantle chemical weapons and come to Geneva. And the rebels say, no, they don't want that. So they want the killing to continue.
Oh, yeah, of course they do, because the whole point is it's really about fight over the 60% of the world's money is American dollars, virtual or real. 30% goes to the petrodollar, and the other 10% is all the other currencies on Earth. This is a fight over the petrodollar. It's a fight over global hegemony of the European-style bankers that control our Fed Reserve notes. It's a fight over who's going to rule Earth. That's what it is. It's the king of the mountain.
Well, this last point is the key one, that the bankers know that their policies have wrecked the ability of mankind to survive unless we have a dramatic change back toward the American system. They don't want the American system, because the American system means that banking elites don't have power, that the power goes back to what's good for the general welfare. And since these guys are opposed to the general welfare, and that's where Obama fits in, they're willing to do anything to sustain their power, including destroy the United States. And so we shouldn't be surprised to see them pulling all kinds of illegal measures to try to get wars going. I'm sure you know this, and I'm just going to throw this out, but the Centers for Disease Control reported the other day, because you were talking earlier about the closing of hospitals, that there are drug-resistant bacterial infections that are spreading like crazy in 43 states that killed 23,000 people last year.
Right.
Instead of working on things like that, we have war policies. We have we
already have solutions for that. The problem is, you see, what the government's doing in Congress is they're trying to shut down compounding pharmacies. We talked about this with Andy Schlafly last week from the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons that's fighting and filed against Obamacare. We have solutions for a lot of these health problems.
Sure.
But if you prescribe a month of oxytetracycline or some other antibiotic like moxifloxacin for chronic Lyme disease, in many states you get delicensed by the numbskull state licensing authority, even though they can prove on Western blot tests and others that these people are sick. These resistant organisms don't respond because the cost of approval of a drug now is $500 million plus to $1 billion. And on top of that, most of the drugs they're launching are dangerous and toxic, where we have natural solutions to many problems, but instead of a level playing field where we don't have to have billing codes, diagnostic codes, it's all the other coding garbage, but just treat patients and develop the least expensive, most efficacious, least toxic approaches, including preventive approaches, where we integrate public health care, non-toxic food, proper labeling of products so we can get rid of GMO, proper farming practices so we don't kill the soil and we have minerals in the soil. Instead of practices like that, they're integrated across the board. They're less expensive and more healthful. A friend of mine just mentioned about we have organic, grocery stores in America, and the person who was from Romania said all of our vegetables in Romania and Europe are organic. They don't even think about the idea of buying organic there because nobody would even buy non-organic or GMO. It's not even in their psyche. We've become so controlled by the media that control the lobbyists that control the congressmen and the media that we have drug commercials on every television. We have GMO food stacking our grocery stores. We wonder why we're one of the most unhealthy populations on earth, and we are crazy. And we're going to spend more on health care, so doctors, when they run out of money, will kill us. Toxic polypharmacy, unnecessary surgical procedures, and then when they get too expensive and you need more intensive care, which is right, more surgery, more whatever, those surgeons aren't even there because they've been defunded by Obamacare. This is nuts.
Well, this is what we mean when we talk about the end of the empire. That
right.
You can't sustain the value, the nominal value of these worthless financial instruments and still have anything left over to invest in physical production.
Right.
And so the decision has been made to scrap the physical economy and defend a worthless pile of financial assets.
I don't understand that unless they want to just kill everybody. It'll be another storming of the Bastille and a fall of the nobility, the current nobility in America.
The good news is that we're seeing some life in the American people, and I want to say, sometimes I've come on this show and I sort of taunted your listeners to get them to act and say, come on, don't you?
They did. I want to applaud you. I want to applaud all those people that listen to this program and other programs. I want to applaud you for calling your congressman and senator for putting a fire into their dairy
what I wanted to say. That there are times when I sort of taunt them to try and get them to act, but it's clear that people are acting. But we've got to be smart about it. We've got to have a program to replace the collapsing empire. And that's why LaRouchePAC.com, one of the things we didn't get to talk about it, but we have a new video up on our website, which is an interview with a congressman who's 92 years old now. He's been out of Congress for years. But he tells the story of the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination. He was a friend of Kennedy's. He was there as this was going on. It's an extremely moving interview because it shows someone who's been through hell and is talking about it now because he wants people to know, how does the shadow government keep you in the dark? And I encourage people, it's an interview with Congressman Neil Gallagher. It's on LaRouchePAC.com. It's a fascinating story, and I think it will inspire people to see someone who's still fighting at 92.
Right. The number to call if they need more information directly from you is 800-922-2907, 800-922-2907. And, of course, it's LaRouchePAC.com for the main LaRouche site, LaRouchePUB.com for the Executive Intelligence Review. You have real plans, a real positive future for America and the world. We need to be a blessing, not a curse to the nations of the earth. And certainly we know to stop being wagged by the tail of Israel and the globalists that run Israel as a proxy for controlling the world. Thank you, Harley. You've done an amazing job again today. Next week, and we'll be back in a moment with hour number 2. You don't want to miss it. Health and Wellness Hour. Our Theater Shabbat will be coming up in hour number 3. A remarkable update on Syria and the Middle East.